Africa 54's Ndimiake Mokelieli joins us now with a story about female African lawyers studying here in Washington. Alan Demi.
Hi, Vincent, and thank you. Well, for 20 years now, the Georgetown University Law Center here in Washington, D.C. has been helping female lawyers from Africa learn ways to influence their governments to implement policies that protect women's rights. Areas of focus range from domestic violence to rights of women in refugee camps. Fellows of the 2012-2013 Leadership and Advocacy for Women in Africa, or LAWA program, like their predecessors, are pushing their governments to improve women's rights in their countries and across the continent. Tanzania's Hilda Stewart Dadu wants the legal marriage age for girls, as stipulated by the Marriage Act of 1971, to be raised from 15 to 18. She says changing the law will lead to more girls attending school and curtail early marriages and pregnancies.
I'm proposing for the government to use this opportunity of constitutional review process to recognize women's rights, specifically on reproductive rights issues, as a human rights issue to women of Tanzania.
Zimbabwe's Muya Lin Nyaunde is a strong proponent of educating women about their rights to keep their maiden names after they marry. It's an issue that has resulted in court action. While it's not a legal requirement, the country's Registrar General demands that women drop their maiden names to apply for official documents, including passports, ID cards, and even their children's birth certificate.
There have been a couple of cases where Zimbabwean women have brought actions against the Registrar General so that he clarifies that it's not a requirement. And unfortunately, what the Registrar does is he singles it out. If I go and I make that application, then I will be granted like a birth certificate for my child without changing my name. But that only applies to the person who's gone and made that application. For the rest of the women who have no legal access, the women who don't know that is their right, then they suffer.
LAWA fellows have been giving annual congressional briefings in the hopes of influencing policy changes for their female compatriots back home. But as Brigadier Siachitema, a Zambian lawyer, explains, it will take men for real change to happen.
To a large extent, men are the real root cause of the problem. Now, at the root cause of the problem, they are actually also the solution to the problems. If you are looking at some of the African countries, they are the ones who are there in the parliaments. They are the ones who enact the laws that affect women. They are the ones who are considered to be the heads of it. So they are there from childhood at every level. They are doing everything that actually affects women. Some of them, they do it intentionally. Some of them, they just believe that's how things are.
But men's attitudes are changing, according to LAWA fellow Beverline Anyango Ongaro of Kenya.
I worked at an organization known as Men for the Equality of Men and Women, and we used to train boys and men from different parts of the country, including Council of Elders. And also in the course of the training, we would have a chance to really interrogate how men are socialized to perceive women. And often there'd be consensus that how masculinity is constructed within most Kenyan society, it is not viable and it deprives men of an opportunity to have a meaningful relationship with women, be it their wives or be it their spouses or girlfriends.
And joining us now for more on the LAWA program at the Georgetown University Law Center is its director, Jill Morrison. Thanks so much for joining us today, Ms. Morrison.
Thank you for having me on.
And I should say congratulations, 20 years now into this program, LAWA. You've been bringing fellows over the time, talking about so many issues. Tell us a little bit more about the LAWA program and how it works.
Sure. Well, the LAWA program was actually initiated in 1993 as a way of providing further human rights education for women attorneys from Africa who are working on women's rights issues, who already have some experience in their areas. So the point was really to bring them for advanced legal training, especially implementing a human rights framework so they could take these skills back to their home countries and do amazing things, which they definitely have.
Speaking about amazing things, I know when they come here, they probably get exposed to a whole new way of how law is practiced. How effective are they able to translate? How effectively are they able to translate their perception of how it should be on the ground when they get home?
They've been surprisingly effective. One of the things we've noticed in the past few years is that when there have been constitutional reforms, for example, in Kenya, that clearly are following in a human rights framework, the LAWA fellows actually know how to implement them properly as they were intended to be implemented, because they actually understand the full scope of that framework and how powerful it can be. We've also seen LAWAs go back and start their own human rights organizations with other alumni in both Ghana and Tanzania and Uganda.
And of course, we've been covering the LAWA program for a few years now. The caliber of people, as you mentioned, range from very experienced lawyers to those who are maybe just coming out of college. How do you recruit them? How do you find the people to bring in? And what's the process?
Sure. So when the program first started, it was actually a project of USAID. So they did a lot of the recruiting within their own missions. As we built our reputation, of course, they're very small women's rights communities within these countries, so everyone knows everyone, and eventually that's how the word gets out. So we tend to have very high quality candidates who are applying because they know what our requirements are.
And it's a pretty competitive program, but also you were talking about how you cover basically 100% of tuition.
Yes.
Which is the core of what they're traveling for, but they just have to cover living expenses.
Yes.
Are most able to do that?
So we have noticed that there are certain countries that we simply can't reach because in recent years we have not been able to fully cover the living expenses. We hope to change that in the coming years and actually provide for that. But we find that 100% of them believe that it was worth the investment in taking that year off to actually delve into the issues that they care so deeply about. And it truly is a luxury to actually have that time to kind of get out of the practice mode and start really thinking about what they've learned and then taking their new skills and applying them to the problems that they have so much familiarity with.
Now, we ran in the package the biggest problem, which is the men who have to also change. I'm curious about the program. I know it's for women. Do you have men in that program? And how involved are men in trying to influence some of these policy changes that need to happen?
Sure. Well, this is our first year actually that we have a male LAWA.
Okay.
He is actually from Ethiopia.
Okay.
We have had other men apply. Unfortunately, in their interviews, very often they said things that simply reaffirm the fact that they believed in patriarchy. This one was completely different. We are very aware of so that's one of the things that we're very focused on in the program when they're developing their theses, which are actually intended to solve problems back home, is understanding the cultural context in which those problems occur. So all of them consider what are the norms of patriarchy, the cultural norms, what do we really have to unearth to get at these problems. And one of the fellows last year actually wrote her thesis on men's role in addressing domestic violence.
And that's the other question I was about to ask you. You know, the issues just range from everything, domestic violence, and some of your fellows also address the issue of refugees and also polygamy. But now, you know, a lot of these tap into that cultural aspect, and there are a lot of these, you know, non-traditional laws. How are the fellows able to merge these two, you know, coming from a Western-based education or advanced education to going back home to implement things that maybe not all understand?
So part of that is they have the knowledge of their culture. They know what structures that they're working in. And very often some of their solutions will specifically address working with thought leaders, cultural leaders, tribal leaders to start implementing change. They understand that there's no success that can be found by taking purely Western ideas and trying to inflict them on their countries. That simply will not work. Right. They know that they have to be very aware and astute to cultural norms in slowly creating change.
Well, all the best to them and to you and the program.
Thank you.
Because it's a tough call. But, you know, as I said, we wish you all the best.
Thank
and
you.
thanks so much for coming to join us today. That's Jill Morrison. She's the Director of the Leadership and Advocacy for Women in Africa program, or LAWA, at Georgetown University Law Center. Back to you, Vincent.